She is an award-winning leadership and community work. She is the founder of Think Tank, that was the Ugandan youth group. If you look in the back, you know, like especially the ladies, we're going to the toilet, see that post at the back? That's all about Caroline. Now, here's her book, show it up. What's it called?
Challenges of Identity, a Psychological Perspective.
Right.
Wow!
Let me just hand it over to you. Go for it. Caroline, big hand. Yeah.
Oh my God, I understand Colin has given me a question and answer session, but before I get into that, I'd like to explain a little bit of Challenge of Identity and my journey for writing this book. Most of the speakers here, especially Grant, touched on identity. Anything that you do, even in business, is about your identity. How you identify yourself, the social systems that you're in, your environment, perception, cognitive thought process, which is the mind, and so forth. So he was talking about that. When I wrote this book, I went through challenges of my own identity. First of all, my profession is a psychologist. That's why I wrote from a psychological perspective. And then it's both a self-help book and also an academic book. So I went from the views of psychological researchers and academic and sociological studies. So I was really in search of how I'm going to identify myself and what I studied within my discipline and my environment. Identity doesn't have a color. It's actually very fluid. Personal identity is quite fluid. Then I wrote about cultural identity and I wrote about social identity. My personal identity was my journey, because my journey started when I was obviously young in the UK. I'm not from here. I came in when I was 5 years old. I am now in my 30s. Now I'm telling you how old I am. Like early 30s, you know. So basically I'm from Africa. Basically, I should have said that I am an African first of all.
Where?
I'm from Uganda.
Yay!
Yes! Are you from Uganda? Say something in Ugandan.
Jambo!
Oh! That's Swahili. Jambo Swahili, but it's an East African language. But anyway. Olyocha means how are you? Yes, girl. So basically, I speak 3 languages, by the way. I speak Luganda, Swahili, and Lusoga, and then English, 4 languages now. So basically, I came here when I was 5. My mother brought me here when I was 5 years old. Cut the long story short, went through the school systems, went through the cultural changes and all of that. And then within that process, I realized I was trying to find myself, because the first 5 years of your life matters. There's a man called John Bowlby in psychology. He deals with attachment. So the first 5 years of your life, what you teach the children matters. You know, it stays in their cognitive system, their mind, you know, their spirit, whatever. So after that, after coming from school, university, I was finding myself. I was in a gang. I was told that by the age of 21, I'll be dead. So, and then I managed to go through all those stereotyping, finding the culture, trying to seek for mentorship, trying to seek for, how can I say, love in the new social system. Then I fought all of that. Then I began to look at myself. When I started looking at myself, because I beat all the odds, like what Grant was talking about, what people were telling me, my mom, my family, people were telling me, but not knowing that actually she's in search of who she needs to be and search of self-love, which everybody goes through that journey. After I've accomplished that journey, this book came out of it. And as you heard my memo, my profile, I'm a founder for Think Tank 720, one of my co-partners here, Jude Josephs, and he also got another business called Biggs. But I began to get mentors. Mentors searched for me. I didn't even search for mentors. Mentor came my way because they saw something special in me. One of my first mentors was my lecturer at uni. He said to me, "You can do it, Caroline. You're very clever. You're very intelligent, very clever. You don't have to fit in. You understand?" And then out of that came different privilege, like speaking in seminars at uni. Then I started to see people actually taking me serious. I was like, "Oh my God, I've got a gift here." So I tapped into my gift. I wrote the book. After in the process of me writing this book, I had to travel different places to find the different social identities. Actually, one of my friends that helped me write a chapter in this book is here. His name is Nicholas Cooper. Put up your hand. I was in Amsterdam, I was in Holland when I wrote this book. He was always on the phone to me. He was like unpacking the social systems, the cultural identities that we have. But I'm just going to read you just the nutshell of the book and what's in it. And then from there we'll take the Q&A questions if you want to ask me anything about identity, anything about the psychological perspective. All your questions are welcome. So, chapter 1. In this book, chapter 1 aims to unpack the definition of identity and how one can define identity in its simplicity. Chapter 2 deals with the social identity, how one sees the self and their identity from a social view and how they relate to their identity whilst in a social environment such as this. Chapter 3 opens up by exploring cultural identity, looking at identity from a culture view and how culture can contribute to identity. Chapter 4 explores identifying the self within relationships, attachments, and the actual self, and externally and internally. Chapter 5 is the Author's Corner, which is about me, my journey. A little bit, I've just told you about my journey. The Author's Corner, where the author expresses her own experience with identity and challenges they've faced with the identity. The theme of this book aims to... The theme of this book aims to look at identity from a psychological perspective with an intention to help the reader to understand and ascertain causes and the effects of the challenges of identity. This can be seen expressed through labelism, behaviorism, emotional expectation, and environments and institutional limitation towards the nature of the human being within their natural state, which is freedom and from the boxes of the confinement both on earth and within the self. So that's the book in a nutshell. So I'll welcome any Q&A. You can get my book on Amazon. It's £10.33p. And yeah, I'll be having a book release party soon. Yay! All of you are welcome, by the way.
I've got a question. So, just correct me, you said you was in a gang?
Yes.
I didn't hear you correctly, so let me just ask you that again.
Yes.
How, when, why?
Okay.
In secondary school, by the way, you guys listen to this. If your parents here, you know, there's older people that groom. There's girl gangs. Girls mostly get groomed.
Pink ladies.
Sorry?
No, pink ladies.
So I got groomed basically, and I used to hang out.
The guy that came to you?
Yeah, it was a guy, and I used to hang around with some girls as well. So we got groomed. So we got taught to do certain things, and we went out there and did it at such a young age. I was privileged to escape prison, but I've got some marks on those gangs' results on my body. Yeah. You know, it's not major, but I've got some inflicted marks on my body because of this, me fighting, you know, in the area.
You can't see them anyway.
You can't see it, but then again, I'm free and liberated to talk about it because that was just a journey.
Caroline!
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Oh,
So I've got a number. So What does the future hold for Caroline?
Oh my God, fantastic. What I really, currently I'm the youth representative for Buganda Kingdom in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. That is my kingdom. I was taught when I was younger that I came away from my culture, which is Ugandan, by the way. I came away from my culture, and you know, I do not know how to speak my language. Basically, community stigmatization. But those actual people that say these things are the ones that are taking it back. So the future for Caroline is started last year, actually, 2016, the year before that, where I got given this title by the king himself of my country. You understand? And I wasn't even from there. You know, I wasn't raised there or anything like that. Due to my work in my community, and believe me, there wasn't no woman that had taken that position. It was all men before. So that sort of gave me the privilege to go to the parliament too, but I ain't got time with the British Parliament at the moment. But the future for me, I want to open up different institutions in Africa to help the African people. I'm also, which doing the work right now, I'm also mentoring a lot of young people that came from a gang background. Hence why I go and talk about gun and knife crimes in schools and in prisons. You know, so that's the future for me.
And in mosque.
I've got a question for you. After reading your book, after reading your book, there was one bit in your book that really struck me, and I'd just like you to shed a bit of light on it. I don't actually agree with it. I don't know if I agree with it, but it's when you said about English or British, I'm not sure, you elaborate more. English or British people are not inclusive and Africans are inclusive. Now that bit really stood out because I was thinking, hold up a second, are you saying that African culture is inclusive and Britain is not inclusive? Exclusive, that's it, okay. Yeah, British people are exclusive, okay.
So what I meant by that, actually got that, that was groomed in me because obviously my grandmother came here in 1972. She was one of the first ladies to serve one of the first presidents in Uganda. So she came here in exile and she taught me a lot of stuff about the cultures in Africa before I actually went back again to Uganda. Because remember, I left Uganda when I was younger, I left Africa when I was younger. And also I had my mum tell me certain things. And also when I went to Uganda, I saw the culture was very inclusive, it's community-wise, you know, they share, they celebrate, they're not just by themselves, they don't keep themselves to themselves like in this country. Like this country, you won't even know your next door neighbor. Your next door neighbor won't say hello to you. But when I went to Africa, everyone, hi, even people on the street will say hello to you. So this is what I meant by it's exclusive here. Very privatization, very individualism. And when you go back to Africa now, most people are very, they'll say hi, next door neighbor will open up the door for you, you know, family will sit together more.
Hello, me again, I'm sorry. So I was born in Uganda in 1980 and I lived there till I was 10 years old. And my mum was an ambassador to the UK working under the British High Commission, and obviously when she came here she lost her status and she was just basically a refugee, and you know, going from chauffeur driven, you know, chauffeur driven, it was like, you know, think of like coming to America, it was coming to Uganda, right? Like, my brothers didn't even know how to tie their own shoelaces because they had their own private butlers to tie their own shoelaces. I was shoved into a boarding school run by Irish nuns. Yeah, I still get scared like when I see a nun these days. But in terms of like what you were talking about, I had never, so my mum died in November last year, and it was the first, and I went back to Uganda for the first time in 27 years. I've never been back. my brothers, my mum had all been back because they had this connection and they had this wanting to be there and wanting to be part of that culture. And I had almost, in terms of identity we're talking about, I had almost like distanced myself about it because like my mum worked with the British High Commission, she would bring back like VHS tapes of A Hard Day's Night by the Beatles and 40 Towers and Wham, Club Tropicana, I remember that. And I had this vision of like English people, like, you know, who were just eccentric, that had swimming pools and like had like, you know, would have like loads of like people chasing them and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was like I had to kind of, my identity was trying to find who I was, but also kind of travelling around the world and seeing other cultures and visiting other people. But when I went back after my mum died, sorry, back to your point, after my mum died, was kind of realising this inclusivity. There was, when my mum died, we had 4 funerals for her, and and even the last 2 ceremonies we had for her, the local school, 2 of the local schools all came to the ceremony, to her funeral. They had the poor people, the people who were, the whole village, people who were like living on the street, all came to her funeral, and they were all given food, and they were all like welcomed, and they were all made to feel like that they were part of something which you'll never get here at all. So I understand that in Africa, and as somebody that had not been back in 27 years, for me it was weird because I didn't know the language and I didn't know what they were talking about, and they kept calling me Irene. And I'm like, it's Renee. They kept going, Irene, I'm like, who are you talking about? Say that. But, and there was this kind of divide because I couldn't connect with them because I didn't understand the language, and although I could understand certain things of what they were saying, I couldn't really. But for me, the greatest thing was on the final ceremony, the final funeral for my mum. You know, there was something like 3,000 people there. Wow. All of them were fed. You know, all of them, all the kids, all the homeless. Everybody was fed and made to feel welcome and made to feel part of the celebration. So in terms of that was one of the most astounding things for me, and made me like brought me a lot closer to wanting to go back and getting my son to come back with me as well. He's only 5 years old, but so that's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
So yeah, I want to touch on what she was saying. There's a chapter in my book, it's also, chapter 4, Cultural Identity. There's a man called W.D. Du Bois, he's a psychologist. He talks about the double consciousness. Yes. You understand? Yeah. So, remember, she's from Uganda, and she comes here when she's younger. She's facing a different social system, and then when you go back, you're facing a different social system. When I went back, they called me English woman. Yes. In the black skin though. You understand? And when I'm here, I am African. So who am I? What's my double consciousness? You understand? That is the identity. Thankfully enough, I know who I am. After seeking and searching for a lot of things. There's another question over there.
What if you can't, you feel like you can't be defined as something, and then you have your children and they are mixed, and then they start asking you where they're from. Are you pure Ugandan?
Yes, I am.
So what if I'm half Ivorian, half Jamaican. I was born in France. So what am I?
African.
Yeah. Can I just answer her? Your bloodline, your heritage, where your dad's from, is what identify you, your DNA, your heritage. Whether you know it or not, it's your bloodline.
Come forward.
Come forward. I'm sorry, people are talking from the back.
If you're Ghanaian...
Set the microphone. Set the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Sorry to cut you. It actually depends what part of Africa you come from. So if you are Ghanaian, it usually follows the woman's line. I'm half Nigerian, half Ghanaian. And I know Nigeria follows the father. But definitely in Ghana, if you're sweet, if you're fancy, it's definitely the woman's line.
Okay, something new every day.
And Caroline,
Sorry. Can I just say one thing, right? A couple of weeks ago, I was in Glasgow with one of my best friends who I've known for 20 years, right? And she said to me, Renee, what's your identity? She's Tamil, she's from Sri Lanka, she's Tamil, what she say, she's Tamil. She's a fucking millionaire. She's a Tamil. And she's going, what's your identity? Are you black? Are you British? Me and my friends can't work you out. We can't work you out. Are you, because you've got this posh voice and you're from Uganda and she said, you will never be accepted in Britain. You will never be accepted as a black person. You think that you're British and you think you're English, and you will never be accepted. And we went into this massive argument. And for me, when we talk about identity, I think identity is one of the most personal things that somebody can have about themselves. And your identity, how you define yourself, whether it is through blood, whether it's through heritage, whether it's through culture, it is up to you to define who you are. So I said to her, my thing was, I am a good person. I am a kind person, I am a loving person, I am one of the best people you will ever effing know, sweetheart. Right? And that's all that matters. If I am good, if I am kind, if I am, if I teach my child all these principles, yes, I was born in Uganda, but I was shoved into in a British boarding school from the age of 5 years old. Then I came here from the age of 10 years old. Then I had to just, change. So I would just like to say that when people talk about their identity, it's one of the most personal things ever.
Alright, let me just clarify, because there's a lot of confusion about identities. There's a difference between personal identity, cultural identity, social identity, and the list goes on. If you read my book, you understand what I'm talking about. But right now, we're talking about cultural identity, which is different from your personal identity. Do you understand? When the man that was over there that came here and said about the woman and the man, right? That's a bit more for me to go. What I've been taught from my heritage is that the man's bloodline is what makes your heritage and your DNA. So in Africa we have clans, right? Your history, like Marcus Garvey says, your history tells you who you are. So we cannot say we can't identify ourselves by our history. And for me, I'm unapologetically African. You understand? So, hold on, your question?
Last question. Okay. So you're saying it's identity comes from a man. I'm not disputing that. That's your opinion. I'm not. But so my daughter, it's a question that it's something that I want to talk about with my children, because it's something that I've had to work out. What is my identity? When I was pregnant, I was like, oh, what's your ethnicity? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I always just put black other, because I don't put you either black African or black Caribbean. And I'm like, well, I'm both. So I'm black other. Now my two children, their dad is English. So, but they're not English. So in Uganda, as you're saying, they take their from their dad, they are not English.
Why not?
Well, they're English. No, they're English. They were born in England. They were born in England. Hi guys. She's Radio, connecting with people, having a live discussion.
So guys, we had some great stuff so far.